Hi Steve, how you going?
Great. Looking forward to coming to Australia.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to having you here. So it's good to finally speak and look. It's I've been interested in interviewing like a number of futurists and for a while, and I've been especially yourself and Ben. I did Ben just a little while ago, and it's been great.
Oh, great.
So yeah, it's good to have the privilege to speak to you guys. I spent so much time and energy and on these concepts of AI and the future of humanity and existential risks.
Yeah.
So it's great. Now, so yeah, how are you anyway?
Oh, doing great.
That's
We've
good.
got the AGI conference coming up here at Google in about a week or so.
Yeah.
And so I think there'll be some interesting discussions there. And then the summit in Australia, I think, will be a
Mm.
really nice
I did
event
have
as
a
well.
look. I did have a look at the AGI conference, and I think um, there's a number of Ben speaking, and Peter
Yep.
Norvig is speaking, which is really
Yep.
interesting. Yeah. So
Exactly.
what's his take on AGI these days?
I'll be interested to hear his talk. I think, he's concerned with day-to-day developments at Google. And so I don't think they have a lot of time to be thinking about longer-term future things. But I don't know. He could surprise us. I'll be very interested to hear what he has to say.
Well, yeah, maybe you can report back because I remember an interview. Or he spoke at the Singularity Summit in America a little while ago, and that was kind of good. And in an interview, he said he doesn't see it just around the corner. He sees it as a long-term sort of development. However, everybody's minds change over time. I guess the more evidence you have, the better decisions you can make.
Yeah.
So anyway, can you tell me a little bit more about yourself and why you got into building artificial intelligence and academic background and all that?
Sure. Ever since I was a kid, I've been really interested in the relationship between mind and matter, and really interested in how it is that we think, what is thought, what's the best way for us to live our lives, and how does that relate to the physical world? So I ended up as a student studying. Actually, I started interested in philosophy, but kind of didn't. I liked philosophy's questions. I didn't really like their answers very much, and I liked mathematics as answers, but I didn't really like their questions too much. And physics was sort of in between. So I ended up studying both physics and math, and then ended up getting a PhD in physics from Berkeley. And right when I finished my PhD, a friend of mine had just started this company called Thinking Machines, and it had Marvin Minsky and Richard Feynman, and an amazing array of people involved with it. And so, and AI was felt very much more like on the frontier of where knowledge is now. In physics, it's pretty hard to make fundamental, dramatic changes. Where I think in AI, it's wide open. And so I decided to switch directions, worked at that company, and then became a professor at the University of Illinois, and then was involved with a number of other research institutes, and then some startup companies, and then started my own company out here in Silicon Valley a few years back. And along the way, I've been very interested in machine learning, machine vision. My students and I have built robotic systems that learn from images of themselves. They watch themselves in operation, and sort of like a baby might discover how its arms work by watching them. We built systems that read lips. We built systems that learn grammars from examples, and some of the search engine companies have used some of those ideas. And so, wide range of systems. And a number of years ago, began to get involved with the concept that AI systems might improve themselves. They might model their own behavior and might sort of discover ways to make themselves work better. And it felt like a very powerful and important new approach to doing artificial intelligence. And so I decided to focus on that. And we began to realize that there were social consequences for that kind of a system, and that after many stages of iteration, you may understand the system very well when you start, but after many stages of it improving itself, who knows what it's going to end up as? And so we spent a fair amount of time analyzing the behavior of self-improving systems and finding ways to ensure that they behave in a positive ways for humanity.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a very important thing. And AI, it seems to be a very powerful tool so far. This year has been wonderful for the popularity of AI. We've had Ray Kurzweil making the front cover of Time magazine, for instance, and we've
Yeah.
had Watson beat the pants off the very best Jeopardy players, your quiz show in the US, much like the sale of the century in Australia.
That's the big show in Australia.
Oh yeah, it used to be. Yeah, I guess
Uh,
there's other ones like Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. I'd love to see how Watson would fare there.
yeah. You just
I'll
go
get
around
it
talking
running
about
and I'll keep
winning
the
the game
profits.
shows.
That's all right. Yeah, I'll see if I can borrow it from IBM and enter it in as a contestant. And or maybe it can just whisper secrets into my ear while I'm playing, and I'll walk
There
away
you
with a
go.
cool million and put that towards the ethical development of artificial intelligence or something like that.
Great.
Yeah, but a million's not going to do it, is it? We need more like
Well,
20 or
you
50
know,
million.
ideas are not that expensive.
Ideas aren't,
In
but
this field, you don't really need such huge hardware. I mean, things like Watson, I think, uses a lot of hardware, but people can make a lot of progress on just ordinary computers, and it doesn't take much money to support somebody to come up with a better idea. So it's unlike, particle physics or something. It's a field in which a small amount of money can actually be leveraged to a very big effect.
that's right, yeah. So actually, do you know what's going on behind Watson? What sort of AI architecture they're using there?
I think, I haven't looked at it in great detail, but what I read about it, it felt like they had combined a number of fairly standard, natural language systems, and they just combined them with a lot of data and some very clever ways of sewing them together. But I don't think there were any major new advances involved in it. They were just taking existing technologies and really using them effectively and showing what they could do. And so I think it was a great triumph for the development of the field.
Do you think they'd be able to do something like Watson is today, let's say 20 or 40 years back?
There's a computational power question. I'm not sure the computers were powerful enough back then. And I think a number of the algorithms, particularly the machine learning algorithms that they use, I think were not at that stage that time ago, that long ago. But, in principle, I think if they knew then what we know now, that they probably could have done it. And so it's one of these things where, um, you know, understanding makes a big difference.
So we've developed a lot of new AI techniques. I mean, uh, what expert systems, I don't know if they're even termed as AI these days, but they've gone out of favor. But they were in big favor at one stage, wasn't that correct?
Yeah, the field has undergone a number of waves of interest. It was named back in 1959 by John McCarthy, and he went on to start the Stanford Artificial Intelligence Lab, and Marvin Minsky went on to start the MIT Artificial Intelligence Lab, and they kind of typified the neat versus the scruffy approach. So McCarthy really liked logical representations and using mathematics and proving programs correct, whereas Minsky was more excited by the idea of systems which self-organize and which learn, and maybe you throw together random collections of neurons and they're able to self-organize into something intelligent. And those two approaches have sort of gone back and forth over the time. In the early 70s, Minsky and Papert wrote this book where they showed that the most popular neural model at the time, something called a perceptron, was actually very limited in what it could compute. And a lot of people got very depressed by that. And I think that sort of gave a push to the more logic-based representations. And during the 80s, the logic representations really, flew high. There were languages like Prolog that did logic programming. And the Japanese had what was called the fifth generation project, where they built these special machines that were devoted to doing logical inference. Instead of, today's machines are measured in MIPS, millions of instructions per second. Back then, the exciting thing was LIPS, logical inferences per second. And there was a feeling in the United States that, oh my God, the Japanese are getting beyond, moving beyond us, and we really need to compete. And expert systems were, the hot thing, and there were all these expert system companies that were springing up all over the place. And they kind of hit a brick wall in that those systems tended to work very well for simple, small problems, but they didn't scale very well. And so in the mid 80s, there was, the cover of Business Week said, AI, the emperor has no clothes. And
Mm.
there was sometimes they call it the AI winter, where people felt like, oh, this is all a bunch of hype. It's not going to really work. And the other approach, the approach based on learning and on modeling neural networks, sort of started gaining speed. people discovered ways to deal with multiple layers of neurons, moving beyond the perceptron, the old model from the 60s. There was something called backpropagation, which allowed credit to be assigned to neurons in a complicated network so that you could adapt and change a complicated network to learn some behavior. And people started getting really great results. And so the learning side of things really took off. And in the 90s, people were building neural nets to, recognize speech, to do optical character recognition, and making, real advances in those fairly well-defined narrow tasks. And so the kind of learning approach sort of took over from the logic approach. And my own feeling is that what we really need is a synthesis of the two. As a student, I studied theorem proving with McCarthy. And when I later worked at Thinking Machines, I worked with Marvin Minsky and kind of got the feeling of some of his approaches. And so in my own work, I believe that the neat and the scruffy has to come together. And I think that's where real advances are going to come from.
What sorts of intelligence would you say would be easily modeled in using the scruffy approach and the neat approach?
Well, I mean, today's neural networks are fairly rough models of biological neural networks. And nonetheless, they can do some very powerful tasks. What they're not good at, the scruffy approach is not very good at representing anything with complicated semantics. So if you imagine a scene like, somebody opens the front door and two cats run in and they start having a fight in the middle of the floor, and then a dog comes and they both get scared and jump on the table. That's something that I could describe in a few sentences. You get an image in your head of what that is. No neural net today could even represent the pieces of that. Now, you could build a neural net maybe which can distinguish a dog from a cat. You train it, you give it lots of pictures of dogs, lots of pictures of cats, and it can figure out what features in an image might distinguish those two. And so today's neural nets, at least the way most people have explored them, are much better at very narrow, confined tasks, but they're able to use a lot of examples to learn. But they haven't generalized very well yet to representing complex semantics. Logical systems, on the other hand, can potentially represent the story I just gave in a really easy way, but till now, they haven't been very good at dealing with fuzzy information, with probabilistic information. And so to really integrate real-world knowledge, say, gotten from a TV camera, and real-world manipulation, say, of a robot, together with the kind of logical understanding that you need to build up models for language, I think you really need to combine the two approaches.
Okay, interesting. So the landscape of AI has obviously changed. I guess if you were to just tell somebody in a 1 minute sort of description, how has the landscape changed since 1960 or 50 years ago to what it is today in AI?
I think the first big thing that happened was, when it was first invented, it was named in 1959, though people were thinking about it. Von Neumann and Turing certainly had ideas about how to use computers to mimic the human mind. People didn't realize how hard a problem it was. And so, for instance, I think Minsky thought that machine vision would be a summer project for one of his master's students. And he had a student who did many of the great advances in machine vision, the things that we still use today, came from his master's thesis, but much harder problem than they realized. And it's still the full visual recognition has gotten a lot better. Systems to recognize faces are now starting to be used, for better or worse, around the planet. But the full understanding of what a 3D scene is about, systems are still pretty, not nearly as good as people are at that. And so that task, even though it's fairly well defined, we understand how to do graphics very well. Given a model of a scene, and artificial, where the lights are and what the materials, the objects are made of, you can make a 3D movie that's almost indistinguishable from a real movie. And so we've got graphics down very well. And so you would think that machine vision is just the inverse of that, right? It's just find me the set of objects that make the image look like this. And yet we're still, it's still a ways off. The systems are getting better, but they're still not fully functional. And so the early ideas were that kind of thing would just happen very, very quickly, and it's taken a lot longer than they imagined. Other things like playing chess, which seemed like a very difficult intellectual challenge, it's hard for people to do, have turned out to not be so hard to do on machine. And so, computers beat the world champion chess player quite some time ago using
Kasparov.
very, yeah, using fairly pedestrian techniques. So it was really just the compute power in Big Blue that allowed it to do the searches deep enough to be able to go further than the way that the human did. Of course, the machines the chess playing machines we have today really don't play chess the way people do. People look for patterns and they understand the game in a way that Big Blue does not. And so I think there's still room to improve the way that chess is played, even if the systems are now powerful enough to beat people.
Yeah, it seems a lot easier to predict what computing power increases, but in terms of algorithmic development and sort of breakthroughs, insights into new inventions, that's a lot harder, isn't it? But
Absolutely. A
well,
lot of the people who are trying to put dates on, when are these things likely to happen, it's very difficult to say when a new insight is going to come because, it could happen tomorrow or it might not come for 100 years. On the other hand, the approaches which are based on the steady advancement of computing power and a lot of people are trying to build systems that model and mimic biological systems. And so the holy grail would be to build a computer system which actually simulated the operation of the human brain. And right now, computers are not powerful enough to do that, and we don't have the neurophysiological data to enable that to happen. But both of those technologies, we can see where computer technology is going, and we can see where the ability to measure the firing of neurons and also the interconnectivity pattern of brains. Both of those are on very steady technological advancement. And so the best predictions seem to be somewhere around 2030 we'll have both the compute power and the neurophysiological understanding to build precise models of a human brain running on a piece of hardware.
interesting. Well, as Popper, I think with Popper, who says we cannot know today what we'll discover tomorrow.
Yeah,
Um,
that's a
but it,
great quote.
yeah, yeah. But I think what Kurzweil is, that's even earlier than what Kurzweil says. I think didn't he say something like 2039 for the brain to be simulated in a computer, and then 2045 for there to be a singularity.
I'm not up on his latest
Yeah.
predictions. My memory was that it was 2030 for a single brain and
Okay.
maybe 2039 for all of humanity, something like
Mm,
that.
yeah.
Um,
All of
and also,
humanity.
I think huge economic forces that are going to get unleashed. Once these systems start working, the pace of progress is not going to go at the current pace.
No.
Companies are going to sort of start sitting up and saying, "Oh my God, look at what we could do with this," and huge amounts of money is going to start pouring into this kind of work. So things could really speed up as they become clearer.
It's interesting. I mean, people probably do value intelligence, but they don't value it enough. I mean, it's not a commodity that they have talent and people are the talent now. But if you look at what differentiated the human species within the animal kingdom, it wasn't winning at biting matches, running fast, flying, flapping arms, or swimming. It was the power of intellect or the power of ideas, as Ray calls it. So it was our intelligence that really defined us. And of course,
Exactly.
we had the right shaped hands to be able to manipulate the environment. But the whole tool making and offloading cognition onto the environment, as Werner Vinci likes to say, um, sort of to me seem to have some sort of feedback loop into the evolution of the species. Um,
Absolutely. I
and it's
think
interesting. I mean,
I think it fits also in with cultural evolution, where
hmm,
we were able to, build on the advances that other people did. So each person didn't have to develop everything from scratch. A culture got built where, people taught other people how to carve the right stone axe, and so technology could then begin to build on itself. And I think with the internet, we're kind of seeing the development of, some people are calling it the global brain or the global mind, something like Wikipedia. No individual could have written Wikipedia. It's a sort of joint effort from people all around the world that's really enabling, now a young person trying to understand how things work. You can look everything up in Wikipedia and actually get a pretty good understanding of the current state of the art in many sciences. And so it's an amazing tool, really, really valuable and wonderful.
And most often than not, the quality of information on Wikipedia is pretty good. I don't know how they inferred that the Wikipedia was supposed to be better than previously dedicated written encyclopedias, like the Britannica. But I've heard that said that Wikipedia has better quality information than Britannica ever did. Is that correct? Or?
I think it is. I was totally. I found Wikipedia totally unexpected. If you had told me the model that they were going to use, that people don't get credit, that anybody can edit anything, I would have thought, it's not going to work. But it remarkably formed into a kind of ecosystem where when people put, incorrect information, or they, put garbage in there, very quickly other people, find it in their heart to kind of monitor those pages and really keep it tight. And experts in any special area will look in Wikipedia about their area, and if it's not saying the right thing, they feel compelled to fix it up. Whereas in Britannica, Britannica, I think, had a wonderful model where they would hire experts in a field to write the definitive article. The trouble is they got one guy to write that, and the pace of change would be very, very slow. In Wikipedia, you get eyes from all over the planet working on it. And, sometimes I read an article and there's things which are wrong, and I'll just get in there and change it. And so, lots of my friends do the same thing. And so I think it sort of incrementally improves itself to the point where now many of those articles are really excellent surveys of the current state of the art.
Yeah, it's pretty good. I mean, and it does, I think, attract a lot of smart people. The
Totally.
type of people who are more interested in updating and correcting information are probably, smarter than the average, I'd say. And
Yeah.
it does attract the right sorts of people. It seems, that model, which is important.
And you could kind of see the Wikipedia together with the people that use it as forming a new kind of mind. That's a kind of artificial intelligence already. Wikipedia is sort of a cyborg. It's a sort of a blending of a bunch of human minds together with this, electronic artifact that together are doing something that the individual people couldn't do, and even the people as a group without the Wikipedia there couldn't get to the same place. And so it's a simple, but it's an enabling technology that allows the collection and the building up of knowledge in a way that's uniquely new. And I think it's a
Mm.
hint of what's about to come as we get some real intelligence in the hardware, in the machine side of things. That I think there'll be a similar kind of synergy between the human mind and the machine minds.
Could you parallel that to something like Douglas Hofstadter's Anthill, whatever she was called? I forget now.
And Hillary, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I thought that there was a brilliant story from his book, Gödel, Escher, Bach,
Mm.
in which the individual ant is not so smart, but the ant hill has a personality and a mind and does all kinds of things. And at the end of the story, a rainstorm,
That's right.
washes away the thing and it reorganizes, but it's a different mind, it's a different personality. And so I found that story very
Yeah,
inspiring. And I've
yeah.
recently seen there's a researcher at Stanford, Deborah Gordon, I think is her name, who's written several books on anthill behavior, and it's not so far from the truth. Individual ants are not very smart, and yet the behaviors of the ant hill, like if it starts to rain, they know how to build little protective things for their hills, and they
Mm.
send out little foragers, which are kind of like tentacles to reach out and find out where the food is, and they have to make, the ant hill as a whole makes decisions about when to reproduce, how many of each type of ant that it needs, and how to deploy its resources. It acts as a very intelligent brain. And so I think those social insect species are a great example to look at because we can really understand the way the communication paths are working inside those systems. And I think they give us insight into how the human brain is working because our brains are also made of a bunch of neurons. Individual neurons are not very smart, and yet the connectivity pattern and the way that they work together leads to a kind of emergent intelligence, which is the human intelligence.
Yeah, it is this emergent phenomenon. It's going to be more interesting when we all start really plugging into the internet. I mean, when augmented reality, for instance, um, gets very mature and it feeds back into our social systems. When we're walking around like with goggles or some form of layer over our eyes that see the world but with metadata pasted over the top, you know, we might get spam which slaps us over the face when we're walking down the street, but we'll build mechanisms to sort of blur that out and blur the people we don't like out and you know try and filter out some of the parts of reality that we don't want, which is another whole discussion. But I guess
Yeah, I
we'll
think
be
that starts leading into the ethical issues and the way that society is going to be transformed by these technologies.
yeah.
I mean, not only like you're describing mostly what you get coming in, but there's also the face that you put out going out. You'll
Mm,
be able to create avatars that project something different than your own, physical features or your own personality, and that is likely to
that's
dramatically
right.
change the form of human interaction. And is it in a good way or a bad way? I don't know. I mean, I think that's where we have to start doing a lot of thinking about where we want to end up.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's hard to put values on these things before we even try them, and I guess it's not really the technologies which have the value, which have the good or bad value. It's just how we end up using them. And I
Yeah,
hope we can really find safe ways and ethical ways to deploy the technologies so that the likelihood of there being a beneficial outcome is increased.
exactly. Yeah, I think the technology is really just a vehicle whereby humanity can express its deepest values. It express, it's a new way to express the human spirit
Mm.
in a much larger stage. And we can express both the best aspects of humanity and the worst aspects. And so the technology itself is amoral.
Yeah, agreed. But anyway, like I was going to ask the questions. What these days do you think AI can do a lot better than humans, and what are humans a lot better at doing than AIs? And
Today's AIs are pretty limited. We don't have any real, AGI is the term that a lot of people are using, artificial general intelligence, something which can deal with every aspect of the world, having cameras and being able to understand visually the environment, being able to converse, to both speak and listen, to be able to reason about the world and be able to manipulate the world, like with robot arms. There are really no systems that can do that yet today. Today's AI systems are very narrowly focused on particular tasks, and they're good at checking credit report scores and predicting when somebody's likely to default on their loan. I mean, that's a kind of a practical application that is very, very high value, and those systems are better than people are at doing. As we go forward, I'm amazed, like in this tragic nuclear disaster in Japan. I think it's a travesty that they were sending people into these reactors, to get irradiated to fix things. I mean, my God, we should have robots that can do that kind
I
of
know,
task. That's something where
especially Japan.
and in Japan is a robot central. So,
God.
that I found a very disturbing sequence of
Mm,
events.
mm.
Hopefully, we'll learn from that, though. Mhm.
Yeah, I hope so. But I mean, I think maybe some of the cognitive things that AIs do are very good with maths and but it's AIs seem to be very bad at the moment compared to us per se at operating in the environment. Um,
Yeah.
the AI's ability to interpret visual information is is quite difficult. But I mean, maybe it can do it in a different way to us, and sort of short circuit the complexity involved in doing so and get there a lot quicker. But after all, we don't know.
Yeah. There's, the one of
What
the
they'll
most
set up.
recent things is the Connect system that
Yeah,
the
Microsoft
game
Connect.
tool from Microsoft, which is
Darn cheap.
very very good, and it uses some special technology for
Mm,
retrieving 3D data,
mm.
and that's an example of not doing it the way that people do it, but getting some nonetheless very valuable input. And apparently, lots of labs now are starting to use these video game Connect systems as one of their input devices.
Have you used one of those before? We've got a hackerspace in Melbourne that does a bit of, hacking with Connects and flying
Oh,
around
great! I
quadcopters and whatnot.
haven't seen it in operation, so I would love to see that maybe when I visit.
Well, I'm hoping Hackerspace might be coming to the Singularity Summit, and
Oh,
doing
great.
some demonstrations. We got Ray Jarvis, who's, have you ever heard of him? He's a
Not.
roboticist in Australia. He's pretty big. He's the head of the Monash Centre for Robotics. He's been doing stuff since the 80s. He's been quite
Oh,
well
fantastic.
released in Australia. He's going to be
Okay.
demonstrating some of the Neo robot
Oh, great.
things. Yeah, it's got one of those, so that'll be fun watching it
Yeah.
do whatever it needs to do, whatever he's making this Neo robot do. I like the idea
Nice.
of demonstration. So um, I think Hackerspace should be able to come along and do some stuff. It just adds an extra feel that people can connect to a little bit more. It gives people some form of accessibility to the technologies, makes people feel that they or it can be involved, because not everybody has a PhD and has the time to commit to learning the backgrounds of all different types of AI programming techniques and then engineering this sort of stuff, let alone the finances to do so. But
Exactly. I
get
mean,
at home sort of hackery can be fun.
yeah. I mean, one of the trends, I don't know if it's big in Australia, but here,
Mm.
high school students have these contests where they, robots battle one another in various kinds of a task. There are battle bots where they actually try and destroy one another, and there are, things where they try and play soccer, robot soccer, that kind of thing. And it's a wonderful way. I mean, the kids love it, and they learn a ton about both about robotics and about technology and about what it takes to work as a team to build a system. And the competitions are very exciting, and they, generate a lot of interest. And so I think that's a wonderful trend.
So, what's your favourite implementation of AI at the moment?
Well, I've got my own systems, which unfortunately we're not being public with at the moment.
Yes.
And I think every AI researcher thinks that their approach is much better in certain ways than other people's. And so, I'm very hopeful about my system. But I think, there are a lot of researchers around the world that are exploring different approaches that I think there are quite a few exciting ones coming. The AGI conference in particular is neat because it often brings people from different camps who are trying to build whole AGI systems. So they're really trying to mimic, the whole range of intelligent behaviors, and yet they often have very different perspectives. And so it's a nice place where they can get together and compare notes and sort of see which aspects are most important and which ones aren't.
Totally wish I could be there to witness it. I think it's one of those. I think would be a great conference with a lot of technical detail, but pretty much it's for the AGI experts. But as just somebody who's got a keen interest in these subjects, I think it would be amazing. But I'm stuck here organising Singularity Summit in
Yeah,
Australia.
that's too, I
Damn.
think. And also, I think they're going to videotape the talk, so you may be able to watch them, just for the technical content, but not for the. It's really the conversation in the hallway that's often the most
Mm,
exciting part.
absolutely. Yeah. Well, part of the reason why I'm so keen on organising this Singularity Summits and doing activities, because I get to meet you guys and I get to sort of hang out with people who are quite well versed in these developments. So it's all good for me. I mean, I get a lot of benefit from doing so, I must admit.
Oh, great! I think it's a great service that you're doing because it generates interest, in the general public, and the more people who are thinking about these questions, I think, the better answers we're going to get. And this is really these kinds of questions. It's really about the future of humanity, and the technology is a vehicle, but the questions are things that I think every person on the planet really should be thinking about and should have an opinion on.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, and it will come that everybody on the planet will be thinking about all these things. And in a sense, maybe we do need to sort of move away from the joking, disparaging comments about, okay, well, AI is just a Skynet, haha,
Right.
Terminator scenario, haha, you believe
Well,
in
one of
that?
the problems is
Uh,
many people, have only seen these movies, like
mm,
Terminator, or Battlestar Galactica, or something, and most of
yeah,
those paint a very dystopian future. And if
yeah.
everybody's thinking about this future in this very dark, negative way, that's, what we're going to tend to create. And so, one
Mm.
thing I would love to see is people creating visions that are much more positive, that something that an environment that we'd really actually love to live in, and then that can serve to guide people to actually create that.
Yeah, unfortunately, because of the what sells plot devices in films and novels and all that sort of stuff, it's you need to create some form of tension and some reason for somebody to fork out 17 or whatever dollars it is in America to go and see one of these films. If you boot special effects, people dying, screams, explosions, and just raw sheer power, and then like some unrealistic sort of assumptions that is you'll have AIs that are smarter than most people, but then you'll get the special people who have this burning desire to become like heroes, or who have this sort of relentless undying spirit that kindles them, and then they overcome the AI threat.
Exactly.
Yeah,
It's
but
interesting
that's
how many TV series and movies have the theme of people with special powers. Like I just started watching The Alphas, is a new TV series out here that has that same kind of a sense. I mean, it's interesting the way that our media and our entertainment reflects sort of what's happening in the scientific world.
Did you see Moon, the science
No.
fiction film? Oh, well, it's actually pretty good. The
Hmm.
AI is voiced by Kevin Spacey. It's
Okay.
great.
Oh, that's
It's a
interesting.
really good film. You should see it, man. And the AI is pretty good. Oh, I won't give away too much, but it's a more of a benevolent, nice AI in some parts. Yeah. And the other film which I thought was kind of good was Bicentennial Man. But that
Mm-hmm.
was based on a novel by Isaac Asimov, was it? Bicentennial Man.
I'm not sure, but yeah, I
Yeah.
did see that film. That was quite interesting, I thought.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting, like how they sort of integrated robotics and into the everyday world, and you had somebody sitting there with an old newspaper, still reading it, like in the 1950s, and then an AI in right next to it, a robot walking around doing the dishes and operating in the world right next to it. Is quite interesting contrast, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
So now I guess Nick Bostrom. Um, he's at the Future of Humanity Institute in Oxford, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's right. And then we got the Singularity Institute and the Foresight Institute and many others, and all discussing the idea of an existential threat or existential threats. What does that mean? Does it mean there's a threat to existentialism? What about
Well,
existential opportunities?
I mean, they're looking for situations that might lead to the end of the human race. So, end of the existence of
Oh,
humanity.
okay.
and uh, and I'm really glad they're thinking about it. You know, everything from asteroids hitting the Earth
Mm,
to when is the sun gonna go explode and destroy the planet? All those kinds of things. And AI is a potential existential risk. If
of
we don't
course.
do it carefully, the systems could take over and lead to the end of humanity. I personally find it kind of depressing to think about those things. But I think there's a subtler notion of existential risk, which is important to think about, even if you're not thinking about the, death and destruction kinds of scenarios. And that is that, humanity survives in a wonderful, thriving way. We build these amazing machines. We solve all the problems. And yet something that today we would regard as very precious to ourselves is somehow lost in the process. And so, like today, there are things, compassion, love, a love of children,
Mm,
humor, enjoyment, poetry, a sense of, spiritual connection with the
yeah.
universe. All those things are very precious to many people. And, there are scenarios in which humanity survives, and yet we don't look anything like what we look like now. And so the kind of existential risk that I perhaps am most interested in is really identifying, what are the values that we care most about, and how can we ensure that those thrive and survive in the future, and that we're not just, human in name, but, human in the sense of our real spirit of what we care about.
That's true. Although it brings up the issue that what we care about now may not be what we care about in the future. Like, let's go back, a good 4,000 years, and or even more less than that. A lot of people were very interested in watching people fight to the death.
Mm-hmm.
And incredible animal cruelty. I think was it the Jewish or the Greeks used to Israelites used to have cats like in sort of cauldrons and burning them alive, and you'd get masses of people watching this and cheering, and
Mm-hmm.
it's amazing, what the human species will do to keep itself entertained these days. I think it's good that we're against animal cruelty and we're against cruelty in general, but there seems to be some sort of biological drive to get off on that sort of thing. You even see
Mm-hmm.
killer whales playing with seals, for
Yeah,
instance.
I've seen videos of that.
Yeah, before they eat them, just throwing them about and having a bit of fun. Um, but I mean, is it there's some values which maybe we have today that we will want to make sure that that's not going to be a constant thing in the future, and it's not going to shape the future of intelligent life in the universe.
I'm totally with you there.
Yeah.
I think the human psyche. I mean, you look at literature from any era. It talks about the battle between good and evil, and in many cases, it's sort of a battle between the forces in our psyche which are aiming toward our own individual egoic, survival and thriving, and the forces which contribute to the greater society. And I think every human has both of those inside of ourselves. And the kind of more psychopathic type of personality has sort of downplayed the social good aspect. And I think, you described sort of the barbarity of some of the cultures from thousands of years ago. I think there's a general trend toward greater compassion and greater understanding. A couple hundred years ago, many cultures felt slavery was fine. Slavery still goes on today, but no government sort of sanctions it. And so I think we're moving in a general direction toward greater compassion, greater cooperation, and creating a more compassionate, positive society. But the seeds of the negative is certainly in every human mind. And so, and I agree with you that we don't want those to be what gets expressed in these new technologies. And so sorting that out, like what is positive and what is negative, I think is part of the challenge here.
Yeah. I don't know if we can do it in one quick clean sweep either. It may be more like a trajectory moving forward, and the more we know about ourselves and the universe around us, and the more we'll probably change what we want and what we desire, and work out what works in different societies in the future. I mean, if we could just be incredibly far more superior in terms of intelligence in maybe 100 years, and then we've got millions and billions of years before the heat death of the universe.
Yeah,
So who
exactly.
knows what we're going to be? Yeah, that's right.
So
So
exactly as you're saying, I would prefer these technologies to unfold in a fairly slow way so that as new developments come, we can integrate them, we can check them out, we can see how we feel, make decisions. Many people are talking about a sort of fast takeoff where things change very, very rapidly. And I think it would be better for humanity to do it slowly so that we can make these decisions with a lot of forethought. I'm not sure that's going to be possible given the sort of political forces and the social forces. But I think that's part of, in fact, I'm hoping that some of what gets discussed at this upcoming summit is, what do we want this transition to look like?
yeah, definitely. Well, we're looking at doing polls, and I might ask you if you'd be interested in submitting some questions for the polls that will
Sure.
possibly vox pop on the streets and do some at the summit and then after the summit as well, online ones and whatnot. I mean, the IET have been doing that. James Hughes has been doing that for a while, but
Oh, yeah.
yeah, so I'd be interested in doing something like that too. I think it'd be
Sure.
fantastic to have something like that at the summit, get people thinking, and also having some sort of record of what people and how people have responded to certain questions would be valuable as well. It had some more hard data, some statistics to go with.
Yeah,
So,
that'd be great.
yeah, yeah. So, what do you think are the biggest misconceptions regarding existential risk? So, among individuals in the futurist community, but also the broader general sort of public.
Well, I think most AI researchers haven't really thought enough about what the consequences of the systems they're building are. there are certain drives that intentional systems tend to have, and some of those drives are not positive, if not checked. So I think we need to build these AI systems in a very careful way. And so I think in the general AI community, there's less thought and concern about the consequences than there really should be. I think among the general public who've been watching Terminator and all these movies, there's maybe a greater fear of AI than there should be. And so I think we have a bit of a disconnect between the scientific community and the general public there. In terms of visions of the future, I think most people's visions of the future are coming from films, from our movies. And I don't think they have done a very good job of portraying anything like what it's actually going to be. And so I think we don't really have good models at the moment. And so, to my mind, I think that would be of great value to really envision carefully, what do we want it to look like, and try and create a compelling enough narrative that people can really, feel themselves actually living in that and wanting it, and then we can create that.
Yeah, definitely. Look, I've got Hugo de Garis sort of messaging me. I told him I had an interview. And actually, it's similar to one of the questions I have, and that's what do you think about friendly AI? And can the superintelligence stay human-friendly, even in a highly advanced state?
Well, the vision I have for the way that AI is going to go is to really create an ecosystem of humans and AIs interacting with a kind of a constitution which governs the behavior of everybody. So there'll be certain rights, like human rights, like property rights, that constitutions in countries today govern for their citizens. I think we're going to need that same kind of a structure as these machine systems get larger. And so I envision many systems, working in a variety of ways and with a kind of governmental structure to keep things friendly. And others, I think, have a vision which is more that there's a single system which is going to be, beneficent and will take over everything and create a sort of a friendly environment. That scenario makes me a little bit nervous. It feels a bit fragile, and that, if you make a mistake in programming that single system, it might not do, really what we want. I think the idea of friendliness is good. I'm not sure the name is a little too cutesy for my taste, but I think it captures, we're really talking about the base infrastructure for what human society is going to look like. Computational devices is the sort of platform on which it runs, but really that's incidental. The technology is not the core thing. It's really, how do we want interactions between humans to look? How do we want the nature of human life? What do we want that to look like? And so, I think we want it to be friendly, certainly, but I think we want a lot more than that. I think there's kind of there's more depth, I think, than that word sort of seems to capture.
Sure. There's a few different approaches that have been put forward to build friendly AI. There's the sort of nanny AI, which has some merit to it. I think Ben spoke a bit about that during our last interview. There's the coherent extrapolated volition, where you have a seed AI that isn't necessarily conscious or that general enough to do its own thing, but is very intelligent and articulate enough to program the next AI, and then there's the coherent aggregated volition, which is sort of a reshaping of the coherent extrapolated volition, and the social safety net, which I think is that a way that you describe your vision of a friendly AI?
Well, so there's two things. There's where do we ultimately want it to end up? So like, what does the final state look like? And for me, I think the ideal would be a kind of ecosystem with a kind of constitution guaranteeing the kinds of values that we want. And then there's the question of how do we get from where we are today to where we're going? On that path, there's a lot of opportunity for mistakes, people either maliciously using some of the new technologies or new technologies not being, built correctly to lead to a lot of damage. And so we need to create a path which is safe on the way there, and one of the challenges is that I think we need to use AI systems in order to design this safe future that we're trying to aim toward. And so how do we ensure that the systems that we're using to do the design are themselves safe? And so one of the things I've been doing at my company, OMI, is we've been building systems that have provable safety characteristics. And so they're limited, they're not arbitrarily able, say, to self-improve themselves, that they have structures that keep them from running out of control. Like they're guaranteed to only run on certain hardware, and they're guaranteed to turn themselves off, and they're guaranteed not to improve themselves in certain ways. And yet they're still powerful enough to design sort of successors to themselves. And so I think doing smart simulations of the final environment that we want, and of intermediate systems, and of the infrastructure, I think we need a kind of global immune system to protect us from inadvertent and mistaken uses of some of these technologies. And that's going to be a huge design challenge, and I think we're going to need AI systems in order to do that. And so I think there's a sequence of steps which enable us to unfold these things so that at every stage the risks are minimized.
Okay. Yep. So, I mean, a lot of people think that you need to fix society's problems before it goes further. Like, some people are all about abolishing money and, getting rid of tax and, you know, toppling down existing sort of social systems and getting rid of corporations. But do you think that we should really be fixing society before we start developing these massively intelligent machines or very powerful technologies, or do you think otherwise, or is it?
I mean, I think these machines are the way that we're going to fix society. That a lot of the failures, say, of today's corporations. I mean, look at the decisions like in this country. I think also in Australia we had a huge real estate crash that was based on not very sophisticated failure of economic modeling, both on the part of people who purchased homes and the part of banks that lended to them. And if we had a more sophisticated economic modeling capability, probably that whole crisis could have been averted. And so I think having more intelligence in the fabric of our society will solve some of the most egregious of today's problems. I think it's unrealistic to say, well, we'll just hold off on all this technology while we fix everything else. That just isn't going to happen.
Would you vote for an AI president?
Not today. Sometime in the future. I mean, I think the reality is that it'll probably be a person assisted by intelligent technology at first, and then who knows what kinds of blends start showing up as things progress in the future.
So like an AI assistant that sort of metaphorically sits on one's shoulder and sort of records a sort of an ethical framework that individual likes to work by, and then helps filter through a lot of the noise in stimulus or in perception, and helps guide the hand towards the right decision. I think I was speaking to John Smart earlier this year. I got an interview with him too, and he was saying the digital assistant or digital symbiont would be sort of would have embedded in it some form of learning as to what the person who owned its ethical framework or ideology was. And so you'd be at the supermarket, and then you'd be looking at a can of tuna, for instance, and you'd reach out to get that can of tuna, but then your digital assistant would say, no, not that can of tuna. They hunt bluefin tuna, and there's hardly any of them left, or they're not friendly to dolphins. And so either put some sort of sensor in the side of your hand which vibrates and tells you to move your hand towards the ethical sort of can of tuna, and yeah, so I thought that was interesting.
Yeah,
I
I
mean,
think that's a good idea because that puts direct economic pressure on companies. If many consumers start avoiding purchases based on those kinds of ethical decisions, that hits those companies in the bottom line, and they will shift their behavior. And so that sort of shortens the distance between having an ethical value and having it actually having an impact in the world. So I think that kind of technology could dramatically change the way that decisions get made. That's a really good idea.
And in a sense, like, it's sometimes people can't make the sorts of decisions that they'd like to, because the amount of information that needs to be processed is just huge.
Yeah, exactly.
And so, you could have these AIs mining this information so as to try and extrapolate what would be the correct course of action based on your moral framework. Um,
Exactly.
but
I mean, I
then
think
you
one
could.
area that's hugely important now is nutrition and food. What
Mhm.
food do you eat for your body? And most people, in this country at least, we have, many, many people with all kinds of diseases like diabetes and obesity because they don't know what foods are causing what in their systems. And if you had AI systems which understood their own physiology and the makeup and the nature of the food, I think we could dramatically improve the health of people because there's fundamental decisions there that most people are not equipped to make.
Yeah, sort of like the quantified man sort of
Yeah,
idea, where you've got all sorts of statistics that you like to be aware of about your current health, and that could be applied not only sort of for the body but also mentally, perhaps even. And
exactly. Yeah.
yeah, and instead of having to sort of churn for all the data and remember to record every single piece of information, you'd have assistance or some form of augmented reality enabled technology that allowed you to record this information and that helped point you in directions that would be more beneficial for you and the society you lived in. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah. But then on the other hand, you could have the makers of these programs or digital assistants um, almost hypnotically suggesting to you that makes you feel good about buying something.
Mm.
Werner Vinci, I think in one of his books, which one is it? Rainbow's End. I don't know. It's about, like, he says, there's this "you gotta believe me" technology. You've
Mm.
got to believe me technology, and so that's
Mm.
about, like, almost mind control. In fact, it probably is really, in a sense.
Yeah.
You've got these um, sort of people who, elites and oligarchy of companies. Who are creating this technology and then, like, directing people to do what they really want and turning humanity into a system of puppets, which is
Mm.
something we
I think
don't
there's a
want.
real danger for that. And so how do we compensate? We can potentially use AIs. You have your own personal AI to detect when that's being done on you and to unfilter, reverse whatever it is they're doing to try and manipulate you, to incorporate your own personal values. And so there's kind of an arms race, I think, between systems. But where does that lead? I don't know. I don't know.
Hmm.
Mm.
Yeah. Oh, I guess that's one of the things we can maybe bring up in the panel at the conference. So, you're an advisor to the Singularity Institute for Artificial Intelligence in America, aren't you? What do you?
Yeah, a number of years ago I was when it was first forming, and
Okay.
I still give input every now and then.
Mhm.
Uh,
Okay. Do you still go to the conferences at all? You've been to one?
oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I thought the last one here in San Francisco was quite good. Very
Mm.
focused on biological brains, which was an
Yeah.
interesting shift, I thought.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. What I think Irene Pepperberg was speaking, and
Yeah, very
James
the bird.
Randi, was that right? Yeah,
Uh-huh, exactly. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. Some
yeah. The
interesting.
bird brains are amazing, and some of the things that there's some YouTube videos of what crows do. Unbelievable. They create tools. Pros want to open up nuts, and so they drop nuts from a great height onto a rock to break the nut. And once highways showed up, they figured out, oh, that's a good place. So they started dropping them on highways. And then they figured
Mm,
out that, oh, cars run over nuts, and that's good. But then the cars get in the way, so they discovered crosswalks. And there are crows that will drop their nuts in crosswalks and then wait by the side of the road until the light turns green and then go pick up the pieces. I mean, just amazing insight into human society.
great.
Yeah.
Oh, I wonder. I mean, they don't have opposable thumbs, but I wonder if we didn't evolve. Then what would have been the next species to sort of evolve into a hyper intelligent organism that created technologies like we have today or something similar. I wonder if it would have
Yeah,
been crows or octopuses or dolphins or something like that. Mm,
yeah, it could very well be. If they develop
mm,
some sort of way of manipulating the physical world more precisely than
mm.
their current uh,
Yeah,
appendages.
yeah, it'd be pretty hard to do that underwater.
Hmm.
Yep, yeah, wire up an electrical circuit, no worries.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. So all right. Well, yeah. Well, actually, I'll check on Hugo's last question. Let's have a look if he's still there. So Hugo's right into the idea of like Artalex and Cosmos and
Hmm.
Terrans and all that. I
Yeah.
prefer the normal terms like Luddites and hyper intelligence. But um,
Hmm.
what do you think about this Terminator? Well, it's not quite the Terminator scenario. It seems like this very negative uh, sort of view about the future, that our children will die and super intelligence will be unfriendly in a sense, and the idea of friendly super intelligence is a, a dangerous delusion, as he likes to say.
Hmm.
What's your comments on
I certainly
that?
hope that's not the reality. I mean, I think his basic sort of battle between, as you point out, the Luddites and the technologists. I think that's a real phenomenon. I mean, you just look at the sort of issues that are really hot in the news today. Things in
Mm,
biology, things like stem cell research, abortion, cloning, all those issues, I think, are little mini versions of some of the questions that are going to come up as technology moves along even further. And so I think probably nobody would complain about fixing disease in the human body.
mm,
Um, and then when you start talking about changing the genome to fix genetic diseases, that still sounds okay, but now it's getting a little closer. And then people start talking about, well, aging is a disease. What if we stop aging and we become immortal? Now a lot of people start saying, wait a minute, what? We're going to become immortal? And then you go to the next step and you say, well, I don't just want to fix my child's diseases. I want them to be smarter. I want them to be more beautiful. I want them to be stronger. I'm actually designing my child. And then suddenly, so there's a line somewhere in there where I think different people sort of draw the line at different places where they start getting uncomfortable. And these technologies will make those decisions. Right now, we don't have to grapple with that. That's beyond what's actually technologically possible today. But it won't be for very long. Biotech is moving really rapidly, and so we've got to face it. And that's it's something that it's some of the biggest questions I think humanity has ever had to deal with, and it's very, very important. And I'm sure there are going to be strong emotions coming up around it. And if we can find ways to make the dialogues productive, I think that would be a great benefit. And so conferences like the Singularity Summit, I think, are an opportunity to get people beginning to think about some of these things and finding a framing where it doesn't just come out of left field and scare everybody.
yeah, I do really do. I think education about the possibility of the future being far more technologically advanced than we assume, and education around what's available today with technology and some of the social impacts is very important. So, what are your views on how to educate people and the public about these?
Well, I think these intelligence technologies actually will help a lot with education. I'm a big fan of the Khan Academy. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah,
Um,
that's great, isn't it?
Yeah, he just lives a few miles from here. I've seen him speak a few times.
Yeah,
Young guy who just makes videos teaching, things he knows about, and people all over the world are watching them and learning them.
he
It's
seems to
another
know
one of these
about a lot of things.
media that just is transforming the very nature of how learning works. And I think it's just, the tip of the iceberg, and that we'll see a lot more of that, and that the current approaches to teaching and learning are going to look really archaic before long.
Hmm.
There's a lot of talk about the gamification of education and of business, where some of a lot of these video games really tap into human motivation in a way that people literally become addicted to them, and they become incredibly skillful within those video game worlds. Well, you might as well apply those same things to learning skills about the physical world, around the real world. And so I would expect to see, dramatically more effective teaching and learning tools, and also personal development. I mean, I'm a big fan of looking at your own behaviors and doing various things to become more effective in the world. And I think these technologies, and also technologies like neurofeedback, measuring your own brain waves and training yourself to become aware of what you're doing with your brain and learning to be more effective with it. I think those technologies are going to help a lot in helping people deal more effectively with the world.
Yeah, definitely. Well, what can we do today? I mean, like, I live in Australia. Putting on a summit's an okay idea, but what can we all do today as a society to help educate the people around us and help bring awareness to some of the important developments in technology and help them to inspire them to start thinking about the future and in a different way and challenge their views of the future in a sense that
Yeah. Well, I think in-person summits, like you're putting on, that's a great thing, because there we really can meet the people in person. You can ask questions. It's very, engaging. I think video is a tremendous medium.
mhm.
You're going to be producing a documentary, right?
Yeah,
Is
well,
that?
I'm collecting a lot of interviews, and I think some of the things, some of the points that have been put across in the interviews are great, and there's a lot of different perspectives. So I'm hoping to sort of create some form of kaleidoscope of different views and these sorts of things, which is what I have now, and hopefully be able to put them together in such a way that is easy for people to understand, but
Yeah.
also inspires them to think seriously about the future and not just superimpose today's technology into future and say, hey, well, maybe in 2020 we'll have iPhone 10.2 and it'll be
Right.
extra amazing with blinking lights and
Graphic.
great gadgets. But to think about transformative technologies and how it may actually shape society and just become mentally prepared to take these things on when they really do come along. Um,
Yeah. I think a lot of the core questions are really not so much about the technology. That
yeah,
we pretty much know, with nanotechnology, we know what's going to be possible to
yeah,
some degree.
yeah.
And what we really need is envisioning what we want. What is the ideal of human life and human existence, and what kind of society do we want to create? What kind
Mm,
of interactions? How can we
absolutely.
express our compassion, our gifts, and our meaning in the world?
Mm,
And I think those are things that every person on the planet can think about, and
yeah.
the technologies can make it happen.
Yeah, that's true, and it's very interesting to sort of see a reasonably near-term future where real where we've got incredible enablement through technology. It sort of really does drive us and really does force us to rethink our assumptions about what we want, or not assumptions, or rethink about what we want and our assumptions about what we'll get in the future, according to how we start planning now and what we um, sort of the activities that we do today and what sort of fruit they'll bear in 20 years. It's
Exactly.
very very interesting to think about these sorts of things, and it does bring up some very profound questions. I mean, I don't know about other. What's your opinion? I think we do live in a very profoundly different world today than we did even 50 years ago, maybe 100 years ago, um, in a sense that the sorts of questions we're asking ourselves now, with sort of view to some of um, the enablements of technology in the future, well, the sort of questions we're asking. I mean, do you think it's replacing the sort of questions we were asking in church or in sort of religious circles, or in a sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a very different world now than it was 50 years ago. The questions, in this country, World War II had just finished, and the U.S. and Russia were in this big battle, and the nuclear weapons were preeminent. Many people felt it was inevitable that planet would be blown up by nuclear weapons. And so, I think that was sort of the dominant thinking about the future and the fear there. And the images, things like flying cars and so on, which haven't yet come to pass. It's fascinating to watch movies like 2001, which kind of created a certain kind of an image. Space was beckoning as the great frontier. 2001 AI was an important part of the story, but it was not it was a negative force in the whole system. So yeah, it's a really interesting question how our views of the future and what questions we're asking are evolving. And I think these technologies are going to force us to ask deeper questions. That when we don't quite understand like how intelligence works and what the possibilities are, we can deal with it at one level. Once we start building these systems that are truly intelligent, I think that's going to really shift our own perspective on ourselves and on what's possible and on what the nature of reality is. And I'm guessing we're probably going to discover some surprising things. I think that the current scientific consensus is probably a lot of it's correct, but I think that there's probably a lot that's there are extra things. And so I think it's going to be a really exciting time intellectually as these things start unfolding.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think like what you're saying is correct. There is a bit of a danger that if we don't really figure out what we want at a deeper level than what sort of car we're going to buy or what sort of makeup we want to put on, or whether we want to buy Gucci or some other brand or whatnot, start thinking about the real what we really want as a species, as humanity, as evolved beings in the future. If we don't do that, we could get something we could be stuck with something for a long time that we don't want. We could be
Right.
driving ourselves into hell in a sense.
Something very superficial.
Mm.
There's another recent development has been the whole field of positive psychology, which is, psychology used to be a kind of disease model, like, oh, what can go wrong with human minds and how do we fix them? How do you get rid of phobias and depression and anxiety and so on? A few decades back, Seligman said, hey, let's look at what's good about humanity, what's the best of humanity, and created the field of positive psychology. And they started studying, well, what is happiness and what makes people happy? And so at least in one model, there are sort of three levels of happiness: hedonic, eudaimonic, and charonic, I think is the word, where hedonic is sort of external things that make you happy, like, oh, you get a new car, you get in a new relationship, you make some money, you get a new job. And those things seem to last about 3 months. If you win the lottery, maybe it lasts 6 months. And then you're left hungry again. It's not deeply fulfilling, and you're looking for the next shiny thing to make you happy. The eudaimonic is where you express your gifts in the world, where you really connect to how you can help other people, how you can contribute, and by doing that, that brings a sort of deep level of satisfaction that can actually last for a long time. And then the charonic is a connection with something larger than yourself. And I think a lot of spirituality and religions play that role for many people, or people have a mission which is greater than themselves, patriotism for a country, or the sense of contributing to the unfolding of humanity, the kind of evolutionary experience of being a part of this larger thing. Those, I think, and that's sort of the deepest level of happiness, at least in this model. And so I think by looking at those kinds of things, and maybe at Maslow's hierarchy, the base level of the hierarchy is just plain survival, and as you move up, it's sort of creating love and connection and having some status, and then being able to give your gifts, and then at the top is sort of self-actualization. And I think understanding those different levels and not getting stuck at too low a level is going to be one of the challenges as we move forward.
Yeah, right. Seems like a big challenge, but what would you do as if you were the president of or even the governor of California? What would you do to sort of promote the awareness of these technologies, or promote the more higher forms of happiness, or motivate people towards higher forms of happiness, and to figure out what they really want in a technologically enabled future?
That's a really good question. One approach to trying to generate interest is by having these prizes. So there have been the X Prize in a bunch of different areas. And they seem to be pretty effective ways of leveraging small amounts of money into a large amount of impact. Something to encourage people to envision and write about, utopias, visions for the future. Create conferences like the summit where people can discuss these kinds of questions. To make it really engaging, I think having something which has some teeth to it would be a good idea. And I don't quite know how you would do that, but maybe create little artificial societies. Patrick Friedman is talking about building societies either on floating ships or
seasteading.
Seasteading, or he was just telling me that there's a possibility that they may be in a third world country, that some of these third world countries may section off parts of their land for experiments in new society. And I think those kinds of experiments could really give rise to some very, very interesting insights into different ways of organizing and living.
That's very interesting. I mean, I like the idea. I mean, people have been experimenting with societies, haven't they? What Buckminster Fuller started describing a world where, at a molecular level, you could get certain sort of design principles which held together very strongly. You had these buckyballs, or I don't know if he actually found those. Did he? Maybe he did. Anyway, very strong structures made of many polygons.
Geodesic dome.
Yeah. That's sorry. What was it called?
Structures. Yeah.
Geodesic dome structures, and you had the hippies create geodesic dome structures and started creating like an anarchic society, which is an interesting experiment.
Apparently very cool, but they leaked. The problem with the domes was that they leaked.
Yeah.
They were hard to seal the upper triangles to keep the water from getting through, but they were very nice to live in because from the outside they fit very naturally into the environment. So they look smaller than they are from the outside. From the inside, everywhere you look, the walls are sort of perpendicular, so they actually look larger than they are. And so they're really nice as a space, but practically as an architectural tool, they're kind of a pain to work with, I've heard.
Okay. Did you try and live in one of these yourself?
I haven't, but I've had friends that have had them on their land, and so I visited them, and you have the feeling. It's a bit strange having a circular space that you're in, but quite nice, really. The acoustics are a bit odd too, because you can get focal points, where you can be on one side of the dome and somebody on the other side, can hear you in a whisper. So
that's interesting. Yeah. So So what am I thinking? I've forgotten my next question if I had one.
Well, we can continue in Australia too, I think.
Yeah, that's right. That's
Don't need to get all the questions answered here.
Yeah, that's true. That's right. Now you've done some studies into non-violent communication. Is that correct?
Yeah.
And have you done any writing on that?
Nothing significant. We've explored a number of different ways to structure community so that people are able to express sort of their deeper thoughts. In addition, nonviolent communication is a really nice tool developed by a guy named Marshall Rosenberg for communicating at the level of thoughts and feelings. Some other tools, David Bohm, the physicist, created a form of communication called dialogue. And we ran a dialogue group out here for many years that it's almost like letting a group act as kind of a common mind. The basic rule is that you never tell anybody that they're wrong, that you just allow whatever anybody says to inspire you, and then you share, what that brings up for you. And instead of people getting defensive and trying to say, oh, I'm right, you're wrong, each person just inspires the other, and you come up with ideas that no person could have come up with on their own. And so those are both experiments in changing the rules of communication, and you end up with a very different form of a social interaction.
Nice. Yeah, that'd be an interesting thing to read about and try. I guess what the last questions can be. What are you talking about at the summit in Australia? And also at Monash University you'll be giving a talk. So you're giving two talks in Australia. One's at the Singularity Summit, And the other's at
I did.
Monash University with Kevin Korb. So I think that would be very interesting. So what are the content of these talks?
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to coming. So I think I mentioned a little earlier, one of the things I've been thinking about for many years actually are systems that improve themselves. And I discovered that there are certain tendencies that these kinds of systems tend to have, certain drives, like a drive towards self-protection, a drive toward gathering more resources, a drive toward self-understanding, toward self-improvement, toward a certain kind of creativity. And these this understanding of these drives comes out of a microeconomic model that was developed by John von Neumann back in the 1940s, and it's called rational economic agents, and it's sort of become the key model in advanced modern artificial intelligence systems. But true rational economic agents are unrealistic because they need too much computer power. And so one might ask, are analyses and understanding based on rationality, do those really apply to real systems, real AI systems, real human systems, real biological systems, real organizations? And there's a huge industry in the psychology in psychology these days studying human irrationality, all the ways that humans don't behave in rational ways. And so one might ask, does that apply to AI systems as well? So I've developed a new model of rationality, which I call rationally shaped systems, where you have the precise mathematical model of a rational system, and the system that we're actually concerned with is a realistic, computationally limited system that acts in the world, but the parameters and the design of that system have been designed by the rational system to, as closely as possible, meet its goals. And that gives a mathematical framework that we can really understand it. And we can use that to analyze not just AI systems, but also biological systems in general. And it gives a very nice unifying framework, a way of looking at the development of life, the process of evolution, the process of human learning, the process of how you teach your children, and the way that we're going to build these AI systems. The AI systems are going to improve themselves. The AI systems will build successors to themselves. So it's a nice framework that I'm going to give in the summit. I'm going to give a more popular sort of general talk, and at Monash University I'll go more into the mathematics behind it. And then based on that understanding, we can use that to guide the way that we build the first systems to ensure that they behave in safe ways. And it drives that scenario we were talking about earlier of building safe systems today that will build their successors for the future. And so, I'll lay out that whole scenario and perhaps discuss some of the things we talked about here tonight as well.
Definitely, it sounds good. I'll be at both of them, and
Great.
hopefully, we'll definitely be video recording the summit one. But
Excellent.
yeah, that should be really really good. I'm looking forward to it actually.
Fantastic.
So yeah, I really appreciate your time.
Oh,
Few
thanks so
few
much. It's
technical
been good. I've
difficulties.
enjoyed the questions.
Yeah, we'll look forward to seeing you in Australia, Steve. And
Okay.
yeah, good luck with the AGI 11 too. It sounds like a really good conference to be at. I wish I could be there.
Well,
I really
maybe by
do.
video.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. All right, no worries. Well, yeah, have a good evening then.
Okay, you too.
Yeah, nice chatting. See
Bye-bye.
you then.